don't drive.
All right, we have 16. Let's see, who are we missing? It's a lot easier to keep track of people in person. Although every time at Bhavana, I would have to start to tell people, please tell me when you leave. Because
Right.
sometimes people would just disappear in the middle. They'd be at the evening, session, and then the next morning, gone. I remember specifically, I had to go out and to see if this person was still here. I went to their kuti and I looked in and there was nothing. And it's like, I don't know if they just left or they were abducted by aliens or by a bear.
Or they died.
So from that point on, I said, okay, people, come on, you have to tell me at least, leave a note so that I know that you're gone.
I tried.
All right, so
It's not here.
looks like we have pretty much close to everybody. John the Elder is not on, but maybe he wasn't on for most of yesterday evening either, so he probably has his family stuff going. All right, so let's get started. So we have so far done 2 talks and 2 guided meditations, and we have 2 more of both to go. We have covered dukkha. We've covered the instability of all things, anicca. We've covered the 5 subjects of contemplation, the very basics. 5 subjects of contemplation are, I think, the best place to start getting right into these, into this practice, because I think it's the least likely to bring up lots of what you'd call disgust, I guess, and aversion. Right? When we start getting into the parts of the body, that's one thing. And then today, when we're going to do the charnel ground contemplation, a whole other thing. Right? So, but starting with the 5 subjects of contemplation and making that your basis is very important. If you keep that in mind, the Buddha says, whether you're a woman or a man, lay or ordained, it doesn't matter who you are, you keep those practices in mind. We've firmly established the divine messengers, old age, sickness, and death. And so this talk and the next one are going to be a bit more sutta specific, sutta based, and to kind of show you where I'm getting, what I'm teaching you, where it's coming from. Okay? So there are 2 suttas called Mindfulness of Death. The first sutta, it starts with, the Buddha says, bhikkhus, practice mindfulness of death. It leads to nibbana, it leads to the deathless. And so then it's quite funny actually, because then the bhikkhus kind of get in this little like you ever in the classroom and there's all like the kid, like the suck up kids that want to raise their hand like, oh, I know the answer. And like they try to one up each other. You see this in the sutta, these bhikkhus trying to one up each other. So a bhikkhu says, Bhante, I know, I practice mindfulness of death. And he says, well, how do you practice mindfulness of death? And he says, I think and I practice, if I could only live another day and night, I would practice the Buddha's teachings and gain much benefit from it. And then another monk, Bhante, I practice mindfulness of death. So well, how do you practice mindfulness of death? And they says, if I could only live for a day practicing the Buddha's teachings, I would gain much from it. Another one, Bhante, I practice mindfulness of death. Well, how do you practice mindfulness of death? I think and I practice only if I could live for the length of time it takes me to eat a meal. I would gain much practicing the Buddhist teachings. Bhante, I practice mindfulness of death. And so then he says, okay, well, how do you practice mindfulness of death? I practice that during the length of it takes to chew 5 mouthfuls. If only I could live for this time, I would be able to practice the Buddhist teachings and gain much from it. And the next one is, Bhante, I practice mindfulness of death. How do you practice mindfulness of death? I practice for the length of chewing 1 mouthful. If I would only practice, be able to live this much longer, I would be able to practice and gain benefit from it. And then the last person, Bhante, I practice. How do you practice? I practice thinking for just the length of a time it takes to breathe out after having breathed in, or breathe in after having breathed out. If only I could live this much longer, I could practice the Buddhist teachings and gain much benefit from it. And so after you have this little suck up war or whatever you want to call it, I want to type in, put in the comment. Actually, you know what? Why not? I think I can just share the screen so you can see the Buddha's reaction. All right. Everybody see the screen? All good?
Mm-hmm.
When this was said, the Buddha said to this, as to those mendicants who develop mindfulness of death by wishing to live for a day or a night, live for a day, as long as it takes to eat a meal, to chew 4 or 5 mouthfuls, those mendicants are called who live negligently, who are slack. They are slackers. They slackly develop mindfulness of death for ending the defilements, right? Could you imagine how many of us practice mindfulness of death in such a way that we even think about it once a day? Right? And so the Buddha is saying, somebody who thinks about it as long as it takes 4 or 5 mouthfuls of food to eat, slackers. They're negligent. But those to mendicants who develop mindfulness of death by wishing to live as long as it takes to chew and swallow a single mouthful, or to live as long as it takes to breathe out after breathing in, or to breathe in after breathing out, these are called mendicants who live diligently. They keenly develop mindfulness of death for ending the defilements. So you should train like this. We will live diligently. We will keenly develop mindfulness of death for the ending of defilements. That is how you should train.
I don't quite understand that.
What's that? Did I hear? I don't think I understand. Well, I'm going to talk about it. Okay. So we saw this. Some of you were at the Metta retreat last month, and you see that this is a very a consistent thing that the Buddha does. The Buddha sets a high bar. The Buddha sets a goal for you to practice towards. Right? Whether that's having metta for beings that are sawing you in half, or keeping in mind the fact that you can die at any time. Right? Keeping in mind. It's very hard to do this. It's not easy because A, we're not inclined to do it, and B, we, especially if you haven't developed the skill of mindfulness and being mindful, sati and sampajanya, and clearly aware, if you haven't been able to, if you haven't done that at all, then it's definitely hard. But this is why, like I suggest, I showed you guys the 5 subjects of contemplation PDF that I made, and that I'll be sending to you guys. And this is why I suggest you put it somewhere that you see it every day, right? To reflect on this, that one day you will die. It could be today, it could be years from now. We don't know. So the Buddha wants us to train, right? This is how you should train. So the Buddha's, think about this word, train. Starting with an assumption that you can't do it, right? That you don't do it. You are not there yet, but this is how you should train. Right? You can train, you can say, I'm going to be mindful all day today. And then you totally forget to be mindful even 1 second. Right? But then the next day you say, I'm going to be mindful half the day today. And then maybe you remember to be mindful a minute. Right? And so on and so on. And you build it up and you build it up until this thought stays pretty close at hand. Maybe you're not thinking about it all the time because in a way it's hard to function. You have to think about other things, but it's close. Like I remember one of the things that growing up, my dad always did. My dad's not a Buddhist. He didn't do this for Buddhist reasons. But he would say very often, I'm not going to be around in 5 years. It's like, I don't think I'm going to make it another 5 years. I don't think I'm going to make it another 5 years. Right? He's 73 now. And I kind of, like pre-Buddhist, I thought, well, it's kind of like almost like not jinxing yourself. It's almost like saying, well, I'm not going to be around long. And then all of a sudden you just keep living longer. Well, I'm not going to be around long. And I thought, this is a wise thing. I started doing it. I was like, I kind of like this. I might not be here. And then as I, got deeper in the Dhamma and I became a monk, I started now, you can ask the people who are on part of the Maggasekha community. This is not a gimmick that I'm doing just for the Mindfulness of Death retreat. When we have our weekly session on Sunday, I says, well, if I'm still alive, I'll see you next Sunday. I'll see you next Sunday. Right? This is something that has become part of who I am and how I think and how I act. And even if parts of me doesn't really believe it when I say it, and I say it kind of in a joking way, there is a part of me that's like, well, that could actually, you might not actually be here next week. Right? So like doing these little things to reflect and to remind myself that, yeah, I might not be there. And when I think about, thinking ahead to creating my monastery and doing all this stuff, I think, well, hell, I'm already old. I'm already I'm already almost 45. Like, by the time I'm thinking of myself, like as the abbot and having disciples, I'm thinking of myself how I am now. But I'm like, no, I'm gonna be older then. like, I'm thinking of myself as the young guy. It's like, no. If you live that long, you're gonna be much older. Right? And you're not gonna have the spryness and all this stuff that you have now. And so it helps you to reflect and to understand, right? And this is a good segue to Mindfulness of Death 2. And I'm going to leave the shared screen because this one, it's a short sutta. It's shorter than this one. And I think that you need to see the words directly for this one. Mindfulness of Death 2. At one time, the Buddha was staying at Nadika in the brick house. There, the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, when mindfulness of death is developed and cultivated, it's very fruitful and beneficial. It culminates in the deathless and ends with the deathless. Isn't this interesting, right? So when you focus and practice on mindfulness of death, it ends in the deathless awakening. So fully going forward into that understanding of death helps lead towards awakening. And how is mindfulness of death developed and cultivated? To be very fruitful and beneficial, to cultivate in the deathless and with the deathless. Now this might sound familiar. As the day passes by and night draws to close, a mendicant reflects, I may die of many causes. A snake might bite me, or a scorpion or a centipede might sting me. And if I died from that, it would be an obstacle to me. Or I might stumble off a cliff, or get food poisoning, or suffer a disturbance of bile, phlegm, or piercing winds. And if I did that, it would stop my practice. That mendicant should reflect, are there any bad, unskillful qualities that I haven't given up, which might be an obstacle to me if I die tonight? Now, now you are starting to see a bit more deeply the reasons for practicing this. So you reflect, well, are there unskillful actions? There are unskillful things that I do, habits that I have that would not be good for me in the future, right? Future lives and stuff like that. You think, I'm not awakened yet, right? I'm not a stream enter. I'm not such and such. It would, I have many habits and qualities that would be an obstacle for me. That would cause me to possibly go to states of woe and such and such. Okay? So that's a reflection, right? Are there these things if I might die tonight? And then the Buddha says, suppose that upon checking, a mendicant knows that there are such bad, unskillful qualities. Then in order to give them up, they should apply outstanding enthusiasm, effort, zeal, vigor, perseverance, mindfulness, and situational awareness. So what is this? What is this? What is the point of this? Twofold. Mindfulness of death has 2 points. One, to help us see reality for what it is. And 2, to develop a sense of urgency. I don't have, I don't have forever. Right? I'm already 44. I have all these vision of what I want to build before I leave this body. So what do I need to do to make sure that vision gets going? Right? What do I need to do so that I can cleanse myself? And so then we have a wonderful well, actually quite a horrible simile, but a wonderful simile. But suppose your clothes or your head were on fire, and in order to extinguish it, you'd apply intense enthusiasm, effort, zeal, vigor, perseverance, mindfulness, and situational awareness. Yes, if you were on fire, you'd be solely focused on getting the fire doused, right? In the same way, in order to give up those bad, unskillful qualities, that mendicant should apply outstanding enthusiasm. So the Buddha is saying that you should practice like your head's on fire. Those of you who are part of my of the Maggasekha Discord community, you'll see when I'm not lazy and I actually post it every day in my morning greeting, I post 4 icons, 4 emojis. Those of you who are not part of the community now know 2 of them. The first one is the mountain. The mountains are closing in. How do you live knowing that the mountains are closing in? The second one is reference to this, the fire. Practice like your head's on fire. Live like the mountains are closing in. Practice like your head's on fire. If you want to see the other 2, you'll have to join the community and see it, because the other 2 aren't really, not really pertinent to what we're talking about, but they also can be explained. But this is very important. This is the Buddha is kind of giving you, this is the attitude towards life, right? This is the attitude, this is the way you should be, right? Live like the mountains are closing in, practice like your head's on fire. Right? This is what mindfulness of death is all about. This is why I say of death, ... and life. It's so that you have a sense of urgency to practice. There is this wonderful song that came out around the time that my wife died. So this is 2005. And I know about this song because my wife loved country music. Never really been a big fan of country music, but I know some of it. But it's a great song. It's called Live Like You Are Dying. And you know, the guy's talking to his father or whatever, an older person who, you know, and what did you do when you found out you only had such amount of time to live? And, you know, he says, I went skydiving, Rocky Mountain climbing, etc. He says, I became a friend would like to have. I was finally the husband that most of the time I wasn't, right? So it's pointing towards all of the things that we take for granted because we just kind of assume that this is going to go on forever. It's a very Buddhist song in that way. The song is a really good song for this mindfulness of death, because that's what it's about. It's about developing a sense of urgency to practice. You don't do, you know, you don't get into these practices to gross out yourself. Oh, you know, and some people might even get excited about these things. I like, you know, people who get obsessed with watching horror movies and things like that. But that's not what this is for. This is for developing a sense of urgency and to see clearly the reality of things as they are. But then there's the opposite. Suppose that upon checking, a mendicant knows that there's no such bad, unskillful qualities. Then the mendicant should meditate with rapture and joy, training day and night in skillful qualities. Or else as the night passes and draws by, a mendicant, now this was as the night passes, or the day passes and night draws by, right? So before you go to bed at night, now, same thing. As the day begins, I might die of many causes. A snake might bite me, a scorpion, centipede, etc., etc. And if I died, that it would stop my practice. and it's the same thing. So this is a very important understanding, very important reflection. I may die tonight. And you know, some of these things, like if you're living in suburbia or in the city, like you have to adapt. Like, you know, if you're living in suburbia, you're probably not going to get killed by a scorpion. Right? These people are in ancient India, in the jungles and in the places, and you know, stuff like that. So you adapt it. When you do that practice, you adapt it to the ways you can get run over by a car. Right? You can die in a car accident. There's all kinds of ways. And, you know, I mean, sometimes I go a little bit silly, like when we did the guided meditation and I was talking about, a meteorite could come down and, you know, kill you. And it sounds absurd, but actually there is a story of this woman lying in bed and this meteorite comes down, crashes right through, you know, meteorites, not like a huge, gigantic thing, maybe just like this big. And it just crashes right down through the house and right through the pillow next to her. It sounds absurd, but it can happen. Like, you know, people do get struck by lightning, even if it's rare. So there's many, many ways that you could die. One of the things I did after my weight loss surgery and before I became a monk was I went skydiving for the first and probably only time in this life, because monks aren't going to be skydiving. So I went skydiving, and I was already a practitioner by that point. I was already thinking about being a monk. And some of you know that I learned how to fly when I was 16. So I love planes. I love flying. You know, if Elon Musk wants, you know, asks for a monk to go to Mars, I'd probably say yes. But so all of that stuff I love. So it wasn't out of fear that I did this. But as I was flying, as the plane was flying to get to the point where I would jump out, I practiced mindfulness of death. The plane can go down. The chute might not open, and it might be over. Right? Of course, I'm still here. It all worked fine. No problems. But I used that opportunity to practice mindfulness of death. And it might sound weird because you think, oh my God, that would just make me feel more scared. And that's true, however, except I had been practicing mindfulness of death for years by that point. Let me give you a good example from my own experience. Some of you have been to Bhavana Society. What time? I got to keep an eye out on the time. Some of you have been to Bhavana Society. And you know, it's a tradition. It's kind of what we do. Like, you know, when you're at Bhavana Society, you go walking down the country roads. It's a beautiful walk. Go walking down the country roads. And I did that, you know, for the 3 years I would visit before I went to live there, and the 5.5 years I lived there, walking down that country road every day. And we practice metta. When people drive by, we wave and they wave, you know, and we practice metta towards them as we're driving by. And about, I guess this was maybe about, so I've been out of Bhavana and COVID's been what, over 2 years now over. It's been maybe 3.5 years ago. I started getting a fear when I would hear a car come behind me. And I would analyze this fear and I was like, well, this is kind of weird. Why am I getting this fear? I've been doing this for years. 5 years I've been doing this. I've never feared getting run over by these cars. And I investigated it as I was, you know, over days, I was observing as the fear arose. And then one day I said, you know what? Yeah, I could die. I could get run over by one of these cars. I practiced mindfulness of death. I contemplated this. And when that happened, once I was like, yeah, actually I could die. You know what happened? Fear went away. It was just peace. just peace. Yeah, I could die. I'm just going to walk. Walking is good for my health. Walking is a good thing. If I die, it's okay. Right? And that reaction came because I had been practicing these things for years. Not fear, but peace. Now, I'll be honest with you, it kind of surprised me at the time when that happened. Because I observed, observing my mind and watching that go away. I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Right? That's not what I was expecting, but that's what happened. And it's because of the practice. We're doing this, reflecting on this often. That's the importance of this. It's a very important thing. And so there was one more thing that I wanted to cover in this section, because I actually want to talk more about fear in the next talk. That's going to be a big part of the next talk. I have a okay. So let's see. I wanted to cover one thing left. So we did guided meditation yesterday. We did contemplation of the parts of the body. And so I wanted to show you this within what we call the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The 4 foundations of mindfulness are the Buddha's toolbox for the development of mindfulness, for the development of clearly understanding, for the development of the mind state of vipassana. Right? The Buddha, at the beginning of the sutta, the Buddha says, this is the direct path for the realization of nibbana. It's a very important thing. I'm actually going to, probably one of the retreats later on in the year is going to be a retreat on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. It's important. But in the section on contemplating the body, we have this section here. And look at the English, foulness. This is something you've probably all seen, right? Foulness, repulsiveness, reflect on the repulsiveness of the body. And
Mandy, are you sharing anything?
oh, are you not seeing what I'm sharing?
I'm not.
I see it.
I see it.
Oh, okay. And maybe
Yeah, Sindhu, at the top where you see a green bar and a black bar, and the black bar says view options with a downward arrow. Try clicking on that and click on side by side mode.
okay, thank you.
So this translation is an old translation, and it's a common translation, but I think it misses the point. The Pali here, patikula manasikara. Patikula is an interesting word. It can mean a few different things. It can mean disgust, foul, but it can also mean the opposite, or against the stream, against the normal. And so when I understood this, I realized, and also understanding the sutta called Delicate about the intoxications, I understand what the Buddha is trying to say here. So normally when you hear about this, like contemplating the parts of the body, you think about like it's something that is prescribed to people who have strong lust. Like, oh, this person has brought up, lust in me. I'm just going to start thinking about like body parts and skeletons and things like that. And that is an aspect of it. However, that's not supposed to be normal. That's not what you normally do. That's only in the extreme case. Like if you're about to rape somebody or do something really unskillful, then you really do. He's like, oh, you start really, the Buddha would say, crush mind with mind, right? You put this in place. But you're not supposed to do this normally, because you have to think about it as a balanced way. Think about it as a graph. On the far end is our intoxication with the body. Buddha says it, right? We have an intoxication with health, youth. We have an intoxication with the body. On the other end is a hatred and a disgust of the body. What we're looking for is a middle ground. That's what we're looking for. And there's a story in the Vinaya, in the monastic rules, where the Buddha teaches mindfulness of death. He says, bhikkhus, practice mindfulness of death. This will be of your benefit for a long period of time. And then he goes away for a month. He goes into seclusion. I'm going to seclusion. Peace out. See you later. He comes out a month later. There's like a third of the monks left. And he's like, Ananda, what the heck happened? And so Ananda tells him the story about how the monks they practiced really diligently, and they became so disgusted with their bodies that they killed themselves. And they asked people to kill themselves. And this poor layperson gets involved. This poor layperson, a monk asked this person to kill him. And so he's like, this is a holy person. And so he kills him. And then he feels real distress. He's like, I should not have killed this person. This was bad for me. And Mara, the tempter, the evil one, goes, oh, you know what? No, you should go back and ask, because you're actually helping these monks go to Nibbana. So go back. And so he goes back and he says, who wants me to kill them? So so the Buddha comes out and is like, what in the heck just happened here? Right. And so it's quite funny, actually. There's a lot of humor in the suttas if you understand it and you read it. And so after he finds this out, he says, bhikkhus, practicing mindfulness of breath is of good fruit and benefit. So he's like, practice mindfulness of breath. And so it's kind of over the top comical, but what it's pointing at, it's pointing to understanding that that's not what this is about. It's not about becoming disgusted. That's not what it's about. It's about finding a balance. Considering the opposite. The opposite of what? Well, we normally have this intoxication with the body. Why don't you consider the opposite? Consider the reality of the body so that you can have a more balanced, wise view of it. Because if you have a wise view of it, you do not like it, nor do you have disgust with it. It's just the body. It's just the body doing what it does. Obviously we find certain things that a body does disgusting, but it's just the body doing what it does. And I can show you this page here. The simile that the Buddha gives is another way that shows you where the Buddha is coming from this. So this will seem familiar to you. Again, bhikkhus. A bhikkhu reviews this very body upwards from the soles of the feet, downwards from the tips of the hair, as enclosed in skin and full of many kinds of impurities. There are in this body head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, pleura, spleen, lungs, large intestines, small intestine, undigested food in the stomach, feces, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, saliva, mucus, synovial fluid, and urine. Right? So it's important to understand here that you shouldn't be so focused on the specific parts of the body. Like some people are like, okay, I'm going to memorize this. Really, all you need is a good understanding of human anatomy, and you can go through it all. Like at Bhavana, somebody many years ago gave Bhante G an actual med school doctor book that you can't really buy outside. Like you can't just go buy it. And it's amazing because it has literal cross sections of human bodies. Like, you can see, like, if you want to know what a woman looks like cut in half, you see that, a man cut in half, a body part cut in it. Like, it's like really fascinating. And so you can understand like all these parts of the body. That's what this is about. It's understanding the body for what it is. And so now listen to the simile. Just as though there were a bag with an opening at both ends, full of many sorts of grains, such as hill rice, red rice, beans, peas, millet, and white rice. And a man with good eyes were to open it and review it thus. This is hill rice. This is red rice. These are beans. These are peas. This is millet. This is white rice. So too, a bhikkhu reviews the very body upwards, etc. And then the things there. So what's missing from this simile as this person is examining the different grains in rice? Do you know what's missing?
The bag?
No, but this is hill rice. Oh, I don't like hill rice. That's disgusting. This is red rice. Oh, red rice is pretty good. Oh, this is beans. Oh, beans is disgusting. This is what you notice. It's just
Emotion is gone.
Correct. It's just an understanding of the reality of what is being experienced. This is the point. That there is no, there's no disgust there. There's no, oh God, this part of the body is disgusting. This part of the body is this. It's just simply understanding this body for what it is. That is the way you should practice. Now, of course, if you're going to do something unskillful and, trying to disgust yourself will help, that's a last resort. That's okay. No problem. But that's not how you're supposed, because, listen, a lot of my contact is with young men. Right. And young men become obsessed with lust and, all this stuff. And they're all like, I'm going to destroy, I answered a post on Reddit the other day. It was like, how do I destroy my sex drive? And I was like, oh God, that's not the mindset of how you're supposed to go about this. It really isn't. Right. But there's this understanding because of a misunderstanding, because of how many teachers kind of teach this, that you're supposed to be doing this disgust thing. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's not. You can see I've given you, I've laid out my argument with 3 or 4 pieces of evidence to show you that that's not what the Buddha is getting at. Again, there's the complete intoxication with the body, and this is the complete disgust of the body. We're looking for a middle ground. We're looking for wise, insightful understanding of what this body is. I'll give you an example of one of the, I would practice, as I've told many of you, my normal practice of like an hour of meditation will be like 20 minutes of walking, 10 minutes of mindfulness of death and metta, and a half hour of sitting. And one of those times when I'm standing in front of Jack, who that's how I named the skeleton and at Bhavana Society, for 2 reasons, interestingly enough. First, the name of the guy in Nightmare Before Christmas is Jack, right? The skeleton is named Jack. And 2, Jack was the nickname I had for my wife. Her name was Jacqueline. And so that was why I called that skeleton Jack. I said, oh, I'm going to hang out with Jack. And so I'd be in front of the skeleton, and I'd feel like my cheekbone, and I'd feel the skeleton's cheekbone and things like that. That's why having it, if you can get a skeleton hanging in your room, that's like awesome for this practice. But one of those times when I was doing that practice, I had this really strong vision of my body literally just breaking down into thousands of pieces and being laid down. You ever see like when like they show, like an anthropologist shows the bones of like ancient ancient humans like Neanderthal or whatever, you see like they line the bones up like how a human skull would be. Like that's like what happened. Basically my body just exploded into these thousands of parts and just came down. And that was an insight for me. It's like, well, that is what it is. There's just like thousands of parts in this body, this intricate machine, more intricate than any kind of clockwork thing than humans have made. This extremely intricate thing that I'm kind of having somewhat control in inhabiting. It's this amazing machine. It's this amazing body. And so reflecting on the various parts of the body and what this body is and how it works and what it does is very beneficial for developing insight, for really understanding these things. It's a very good, we have a bunch of people in the chat here. Okay. So Micah asked a good question. There is a level of, yes, you're understanding that this body is simply the outcome of processes that are arising. So it allows you to not identify with the body. This is my body, this is my arm, and this is my pain in my arm. Remember, this is simply pain arising in this body. That's all it is. But we add the extra layers to it. I wouldn't say that the Buddha says for us that we should see the body like a machine. That's kind of my perception. That's kind of how I view it from my own insight. But to see the body for what it is, to really understand it. Now, the whole disgust thing, like when you first start doing mindfulness of death, when you first start doing parts of the body, charnel ground contemplation, disgust and fear will arise. That's normal. You will be disgusted by this. You will have fear doing these practices. But why is that? It's because you've gone your whole life not doing this. You've gone your whole life avoiding these things, not practicing in such a way. So in the beginning, it's going to be tough. But I already gave you a glimpse of where this leads with my story about the fear of the cars running me over. Once you start to really understand these things for what they are, you get past the disgust, you get past the fear. But in the beginning, because we have not practiced this, because we avoid these insights and avoid these realities, then it's going to be a very emotional experience. It's going to bring up fear. It's going to bring up disgust, right? This is why I said in the beginning, you might feel like you need to take a break, right? You might need to run away a little bit, take a break, gather yourself, and then go right back in, right? Don't quit. It's okay if you need to take a break. It's okay if you need to back up if it's too much. That's no problem. But go back when you're ready again, right? Like a child who's exploring the world, goes out a little bit, then runs back to mom, right? And then goes out maybe a little bit further, and then runs back to mom. You go, you move forward, you go deeper. Then when you have to come back, you come back, and then you go back again. Christy makes a good comment here. As I listen to you, I also see it's possible to appreciate its intricacies as a vehicle for awakening that we're lucky to inherit, and not something that exists just for the entertainment or sense pleasure. Yes, that's a very good mindset. especially, I don't really, as you can tell, I haven't gone, partly because of it's a short retreat, but partly because I focus more on some of the more practical things, but I haven't gone deep in talking about things like rebirth and karma and things like that. I talked about it in depth for a question, but the Buddha tells us in many places that it's actually very, very rare to be born as a human. So he'll say that the far majority of people who are humans now will not be born as a human again in the next life. And the far majority of beings who are born will not be born as a human because they act unskillfully, by body, speech, and mind. It's actually a very rare experience to be born as a human. And I think you can, Buddha doesn't say this, but he talks about world systems and beings in the world systems and things like that. And I can, I personally extrapolate it to basically anywhere in the universe that there are beings that are basically on our level, on our par of being able to contemplate these things, then you're lucky to be born as those one of those beings. Any human level being anywhere is a very rare thing, and you're very lucky. And so no matter, if you're born in darkness or you're born in light, no matter how you're born, no matter what your circumstances, it gets worse. you being born as a human is good, and you shouldn't waste, no matter what your obstacles, no matter what your conditions in life, you can practice Dhamma, right? You can head towards the light. And that's very important to understand, not to waste this human life, but to try to practice and live and do as much skillful goodness as possible. All right, so thankfully we do have a little bit of extra time because I didn't, there's no talking about mindfulness of eating. So we're not behind the time or anything like that. We have plenty of time to do our next guided meditation. Are there any more questions or anything you'd like me to clarify before we do it? And so we're going to do the charnel ground contemplation this time. And next Dhamma talk in the afternoon, we're going to go over charnel ground contemplation.
All right, Bhante, are you inviting questions now, or would you prefer us to hold our questions till the Q&A section?
Well, technically, I don't have an official Q&A section. I have it just kind of as a backup. So if you want to ask a question now that won't derail us too long, then yeah, you can ask it now.
I'll ask it, and if you feel that it's not a right time to answer it, we can talk about it another time. The balance that you're talking about reflecting on death without falling into depression, particularly my mind is just conditioned with a more materialistic worldview. I try to brainwash myself with the idea of reincarnation, but it doesn't go to the heart. And so I find it much harder to use these contemplations on death skillfully, rather than being like, kind of like, trying to find the benefit of these things here and now, rather than without relying on the concept of after death benefit. Can you maybe talk about how to use the reflections on death in that manner?
Well, if you're just thinking of it from a materialist viewpoint where like there's nothing after death, then you think about it in terms of, okay, I only have this one life. How do I maximize the good that I've done in this life? How do I maximize the impact that I've had in this life? And how do I live this life in as much peace and contentment as I possibly can? And in some ways, reflecting on death is more important for a materialist because it really is the end. There's nothing after that. Now, of course, it could be the opposite. It could be, oh, it's the end. I don't give a crap. I'm just going to live a hedonistic lifestyle, live it up and party until I die. But most people who survive that long enough reach a point where they just have such a nihilistic lack of meaning, and they seek meaning, right? Even if they still believe that there's only one life, they still want to do something better in this life. So you learn from the mistakes of people who've gone before you. You can see that, oh, okay, well, yeah, I only have this one life. Then all I'm going to do, or if I don't know, maybe I have one life, maybe I don't. Either way, it's still honestly and sincerely is, if you listen to the wisdom of the ancients who have gone before us, not even Buddhists, many cultures and many traditions have much wisdom about this kind of a thing, in how to live a good life. And if you listen to the wisdom of those who've gone before you, you already know, well, this this whole hedonistic thing, this kind of just going off the rails, doing whatever I want thing, will be pleasant for a while, but eventually it won't be of benefit to me. So why don't I practice now? Why don't I reflect on the fact that I don't know how long I'm going to live, and this may be the end. I may have come from the void and go back to the void. So how do I live now? So in that regard, much of this practice is not impacted by whether there's a life or not life after. It's really focusing in on, how do you live this life? Like, when I think about, even if there is no rebirth, if I was able to live long enough to build, a lineage of good monastics who start more monasteries in America, and who have more people are being able to hear the Dhamma that wouldn't have. You know what? No regrets there. Like, I've done something good. Even if there is no life after death, more people can still benefit from this practice than when I was born. Right? When I was born, Theravada Buddhism was only 10 years old in America when I was born. Theravada has not been around long in America. So that goal, I know, even if there is no afterlife, it's still beneficial to myself, and it's beneficial to others long after I'm gone. So it's worth doing. Either way, it's worth doing. At least that's how I view it.
Thank you, Bhante.
Ian comes in with a sutta link. This is a great sutta of the rarity of human birth. Somebody did the math once for it, and it would occur something like 4 times in 16 million years. I don't know about that. Depends on, nobody really knows how long a kalpa is, but yeah, 4 times in 16 million years is pretty rough. Oh. Okay, so I see a question for the Q&A. We'll save that for later. All right. Okay. So let's do our guided meditation. It is 10 o'clock now, and we'll end right about 11. So set your body up in a stable and comfortable position. Close the eyes. Take a few minutes to scan through your body, as we've been doing. checking as you go along for the comfort and stability of your posture. When you're done setting up your body, you can let the body go and take 3 deep breaths. And then let the breath go. Investigate the breath, the body breathing in and out. Remember to lay down your burdens. Put your world down and follow the breath. When you get distracted, remember to acknowledge, practice letting go, and return to the breath. Now let us begin our practice. For what I've gone over before, I won't continue to say repeat, repeat. By now, you know. Again, we'll be using words and visuals. And if you need to take a break at any time, feel free. Come back when you can. I may die today. I may die tonight. I may die at any time. Because life is uncertain. But death is certain. I may die tonight. I may die tomorrow. I may die at any time. Because life is uncertain. But death is certain. There are many ways in which I may die today. Heart attack, aneurysm, accident, malice. Take a little bit of time contemplating all the various ways, almost limitless numbers of ways that you can die. You woke up this morning. There's no guarantee that you'll be alive to go to bed tonight. I, who may die at any time, am subject to aging. I am not exempt from aging. I am subject to illness. I am not exempt from illness. I am subject to death. I'm not exempt from death. I will be separated from everyone and everything that I hold dear. I am the owner of my actions, heir of my actions. Have my actions as my relative. Whatever I do, for good or ill, to that I shall be the heir. I have this body because I have this body, I am subject to these 5 facts. This body is made up of many parts, many systems working together to function. On the outside, we can visibly see hair of the head and body, nails, teeth and skin. Take some time to reflect on all the various parts of the body. Whatever you can think of. Really try to contemplate how all the parts of the body work together to make a whole. All the functions we consider unpleasant or pleasant. Take some time to focus on, examine, and investigate various parts of the body. Now we introduce the charnel ground contemplations. Because we have this body, one day this body will lie on the ground, void of life, useless as a dead tree stump. And at that time, it will proceed according to its nature. That which comes together breaks apart. For this practice, there's really no words to repeat. You could verbalize the 9 steps of the decay given, as I will, for guiding the meditation. Or you can simply visualize the process. If you like, you can begin with the visuals that I gave yesterday, seeing yourself in front of you, sitting, visualize as you grow older, and then eventually death comes and you fall to the ground. Most of us today have never seen the body decomposing in nature according to its nature. Perhaps we've seen animals on the road decomposing. But we don't equate that that is also us. This body too is such a way. Visualize your body 1, 2, or 3 days dead, bloated, as all the liquid starts to seep out into the body. There is nothing bad or wrong with this. This is simply the nature of biological entity decomposing back into the particles that brought it together. This is the process. In modern times, after we die, the body goes to the mortician who fills it up with all kinds of chemicals and beautifies and dresses the body up for us to see. But this is simply another way that we delude ourselves and hide ourselves from nature. The second step, to visualize your body being a feast for the carrion animals, the animals and the birds that pick away at the corpses, the cleaners of the forest. The flies come, maggots are born in the body. Nature's cleaning crew. To help break down and decompose the corpse. And after the animals have gained sustenance by feeding on your body, the third step is to visualize a skeleton with flesh and blood smeared on the bones. The animals have had their fill. The bones begin the long process of decay. As the process continues to the next step, the little bit of flesh left on the bones decomposes. So only thing that is left are the bones and joints smeared with blood. And then over time, as it rains, nature continues on its way. The blood is washed off of the bones. Simply the bones and the joints, sinews, holding the skeleton together. And then over a longer period of time, the sinews and the joints begin to break down. And the different parts of the body start to become scattered. Bones of the hand over there, bones of the feet over there. Thigh bones and arm bones. Ribs being scattered as nature continues on with its course. Bones being scattered by erosion of the ground, movement of water and animals. Contemplate and observe the process of nature. The process that the bodies of all our ancestors up into modern times up until the times that we started to bury our dead. This is how we went back to the earth, from dust to dust. The next step is to visualize the bones starting to be bleached white. The color changing due to exposure for months. And the next step is to visualize the bones more than a year old. Starting to decay, falling apart, exposed to nature. And the final step in the process is the bones, over a long period of time, ground to dust, powder. As nature continues to go through its process, the powder being dispersed and spread into the wind. And then there's no more sign that this body was even there anymore. Fully reclaimed by nature as it has arisen by processes. It has ceased by processes. This body that you inhabit now, that you hold dear, formed in your mother's womb from nutrients and minerals and liquids. Birthed and then grown up, getting bigger, stronger, less fragile. In the prime of life. And then we begin to be more weaker, more fragile, moving slower, falling apart until the time comes that this body is left behind to go on according to its nature. There's no need to be fearful or disgusted by this. When we understand with wisdom, this is the nature of things. When something arises, it then ceases. Contemplate these practices for a time until the bell rings. Slowly open your eyes. Come back to the room around you, the Zoom, your Dhamma friends on Zoom. This is perhaps the hardest practice of all the mindfulness of death practices, because it can get pretty graphic. We're not used to that unless you're like a horror film person. Then yes. But it is nature though, isn't it? If we really just were in nature and we died, this is what would happen. The Tibetans have a practice called sky burial. What's a sky burial? They just put the body out in nature and the animals eat it. It's food for the animals. I wanted to donate my body to what they call a body farm. Have you heard of such a place? It started, there's a couple of them now. Okay, involving a catapult. Yeah. Catapult the body out into the wilderness for all of the animals to finish out. A body farm is a place where forensics people lay bodies on the ground in various conditions so that they can observe the decay of the body. And so they can know, they can help solve murders and things more easily. They have for the first body farm is almost about as old as I am. And so I thought, you know what, that's a good use for my body. It could be of help to people. But then I found out, if you're not in the same state as them, you have to pay for it. So it's as a monk, I'm not going to be able to pay for my body to get to this place. So I'll have to figure out some other way. But once you're gone, body's just, as the Buddha puts it, a useless tree stump. And of course, some people don't view it that way. Even before I was a Buddhist, I viewed it that way. It's always been something I felt. When I've been around people who have died and held their hand and things like that, once they're gone, once you just have this feeling this body is just, it's just a lump of nature. It's gone. All it is. So this is what this practice is good for. And we'll read directly from the sutta and learn more about it in a bit more detail this afternoon. We come back, it's 11 o'clock now. We'll come back in 2 hours to finish out our retreat, to do our last session. Marty and Diane thinking about the process of the body being turned into mushrooms and compost. Yeah, well, that's how it goes. So friends, have a good lunch, and I will see you in 2 hours, 1 o'clock. We'll finish this out.